All right, guys, welcome to another video. So today is Philip Day. We're at reset. It's going to be Philip Day. So he's going to show up in the wheel. Inevitably, people are going to unlock them, and then we're going to start seeing testing results come out. There's some testing that I think is very relevant and good. Some I think is actually potentially misleading. It's just not a very accurate representation of capturing how good a commander is in the open field, right? So in general, I just wanted to go over some thoughts on it. Some of the testing that I find to be more valid. And then in the future, if you are looking at tests, like what tests to actually look for to determine whether you want to invest in a commander or not. All right, so we're going to go over A/B testing, open field reports, the field test, and then finally, what kind of testing to actually ignore. Right, for A/B testing, I'm going to go over on the next page, but this one, since I have a picture, I'll go over. Right, the whole idea of A/B test, I first learned about this in marketing. Right, so if I'm running a Facebook ad, okay, I have a picture, I have copy, so that's the actual text, and then the demographic I'm marking into, all that stuff. When you're doing an A/B test, you're essentially keeping all the parameters the same. You're just picking one thing that changed. So in the picture here, essentially they're changing the color of the picture, right? One's going to be green, one's going to be blue, and then everything else you keep the same. And then when you run the ad, right, you can actually see how it does, right? You spend a small amount of money to see how it does. If the one that's in green actually does better than the blue consistently over time, right, then you can actually determine maybe the green will work better than the blue, and that's an A/B test, all right? And in general, that idea kind of fits in with the scientific process, all right? So I know the definition of science seems to have changed a little bit lately, but in general, when we're kids, the way we learned it was, okay, there is an observation, right? Curiosity, science, and then we determine, okay, like we're going to come up with a theory of how something works. And then after we come up with a theory or a hypothesis, actually, then we're actually going to set up a experiment to test that, right? And when we're setting up the experiment, the ideal experiment, which in real life is very, very hard to do, is you want to set up a experiment where all of the conditions are controlled, except for the independent variable you want to test. So there's going to be one thing where if you test that one thing where everything else is controlled to be the same, then you can actually test whether that one thing fits your hypothesis. And if you can repeat it over and over again, like to prove that one thing, then eventually it becomes a theory. Okay, so long-winded way of saying, right, A/B testing is part of the scientific process. And in my opinion, there is a way to do A/B testing here. There is kind of like a hole for every one of the methods I'm presenting, but that's kind of the best we can do, right? So A/B testing in Rock, essentially, you can do it in Canyon, right? So for example, if Philip comes out, and before I was running ZL Boudica, right? And I essentially run my March or my Canyon lineup against another Canyon lineup, and it does a certain way. There's a certain amount of sub wounds left or units left. If I switch out Philip for Boudica, right, it's going to give me a different result, right? And if I run enough of those and consistently, when I sub out Boudica for Philip, the Canyon lineup does better, right? That's a way to do a kind of like an A/B test to determine if Philip behind ZL is more valuable as a March than Boudica behind ZL, right? I like this kind of A/B testing because it goes beyond just like a personal report. It's actually in a way measuring how much value that commander as part of a march is actually contributing to other marches, how other marches do overall. Because as we know in this game, a lot of commanders, whether it's their buff, their debuff, their AoE, things like that, it's actually impacting a lot of other marches, right? So when you have just a report or like especially like a dueling result, it actually doesn't really capture any of that, right? So Canyon is a good way to do that, and it's free, right? And essentially, at least at the very least, you get 7 chances a day if you're VIP 18, and then maybe even more if you're higher, right? But like, you literally get 7 shots a day, or however many shots you have a day once you're near the end game, to actually start messing around with this, right? Because when you're doing the Canyon A/B tests, all the equipment is going to be the same. The march you're running into is going to be the same. You're literally just swapping out one commander for another as part of a pairing, and then you can start actually comparing the overall results. And it's free, which is great, right? Now, for example, if you wanted to do this kind of A/B testing in a practice arc match, right? One, it actually takes a much longer time to run through the results. but then also it costs you gems, right? Whereas like Canyon doesn't cost you gems, and actually you could get through it like instantly. Just press next, and you can just see the results. Which is why I actually prefer Canyon over doing some kind of manual reports. Whether you're doing it in a outside of Arc and you're just doing a 5v5 duel or something, or even like an Arc practice match. All right, another way which I think works that I actually have not personally used before is a Speckles Rock Battle Simulator. So from my understanding, this is what the main screen looks like, but you could actually set something up where you could start doing like a 3-on-3 or 5v5 duel. That's my understanding. I actually haven't used this, so I don't know. But if you can do that, I think that's actually another very effective way to essentially control all the independent variables and then just swap out one march for another to see how it does. For A/B testing, you have to have something to compare it against, right? So like if I'm going to run, again, I'm going to use ZL Philip as an example, right? I can't tell how good it is unless I actually have another independent variable that I'm comparing against, right? So whether it's ZL Philip versus ZL Herman and all the other marches are the same, like you have to actually have something to compare it against. So when I'm looking for test results for a commander, right, something that I think is very valuable is if they do some kind of A/B testing like result to determine how the march does, how it actually affects the other 4 marches around you, right? Because that is something that's actually very valuable on the field. But when you're doing like a one-on-one duel, you'll never actually get to measure that. All right, the next one is open field reports, right? So ultimately, most of these commanders that we're investing in, we're actually using in the open field. Now, when you're on the open field, most of the fighting is going to be, almost all of the fighting is either going to be murder ball. So usually like one is grouped up on one side, and then another ball of march is grouped up on another side, and then they essentially charge in, they clash, right? Some other ways of open fielding, if you want to call it that, is like city popping or cheeseburgering, right? So that's usually when one side is losing, one side is winning. The losing side gets to hide in their city, and then the winning side has to come on the losing side's territory, right? And then when they do that, you go pop out of your city, either do like an instant proc with Alex, or just like have a march that trades really well for like a few turns, launch a skill cycle, and then go back in the city, right? Not a very effective way of winning KVK, but a very effective way of annoying the opponent and also kind of like wearing them down and draining them, right? So that is part of open fielding, so I'll include that there. And then finally, occasionally, right, if it's not very busy on the field, you could even get into a, say, like a 1-1-1, 3v3, 5v5 duel, etc., where it's just you and another player, you're fighting each other, right? But out of the 3 I presented, the most common one by far, when it matters, is going to be murder ball fights, right? Now, when you're actually pulling open field reports, it's hard to distinguish between whether the reports are mostly from a murder ball, city popping, or duel. Like it just, like even if you wanted to label and organize it that way, it would be really hard to do it, right? So what I'm acknowledging in this, there is still some weaknesses in the open field reports, because maybe you have a commander that's very, very good for like open field murder ball fights, but the kind of fighting you got was mostly city popping and you were getting cheeseburger. So if the reports weren't good, was that necessarily like an accurate representation of how good that commander or the commander marches? Not necessarily, but you know, again, that's kind of like the best we can do, because it is very, very hard to actually set up a true scientific process experiment where you can just isolate it down to one independent variable. Right now, in my opinion, the best way that you can actually do open field reporting is Cubos Mike's Reports Manager, right? So let me pull this up. So here's actually what the Reports Manager looks like, right? You can literally set a date from like October to December here. Anytime I've used open field, it would actually save the reports and compile it, right? So you can see here, by far my best march is the Lucia Alex march. The KP ratio traded 3.31 to 1. Nothing else I had actually traded above 3 to 1 during that time, right? So once you have something like this, right, now you can objectively at least say, you know what, the same person was playing, right? And we were using the same equipment. And when I swapped out, say, Lucia at Alex for Lucia William Wallace, right, you can start seeing the KP ratio, the kill ratio, right? Like which one actually did better, right? So it's a fairly objective way to actually measure one march, how they actually do their trades, right? Because if you do it the other way, which is kind of the old school way that a lot of people did it before the Reports Manager came out, right? They were just like, oh, well, you know, it was getting good reports. But like, unless you're actually compiling these reports, calculating them, and the calculating a lot of them, right? It's not really objective. At the very least, it's like you're looking at reports but doing like a field test. We're like, oh, we got good reports. And what do we tend to do, right? We tend to notice the really, really good reports, and then the reports that are kind of in between, like we don't remember them as well, right? Whereas if you have like a reports manager like this, all of a sudden when you're compiling every single report during the 2-month period where you use the Luce Alex, in my opinion, it becomes a lot more accurate, right? So the two I just presented, A/B testing, right? Whether you're using Speckle's Battle Simulator, you're messing around with it in Canyon, and then some kind of like ability to actually compile open field reports are by far, in my opinion, the two most important ways to actually test and measure if a commander is good, right? And then the third, this is more anecdotal, like I talked about before. You're either going to be using it yourself, right? Or you're going to be talking to people that used it, and this is just their personal opinion, right? So it's a subjective, it's not objective. But two things that would kind of give me some pause when I hear people say this is if a march is too squishy, right? So XY is universally acknowledged, he's too squishy. Also, because he's squishy, he's always getting targeted, right? I've also heard people say that, especially during the early days of Boudica. Now, if you look at Boudica's kit, Boudica is not squishy, right? But maybe it's just this thing where people want to target archers. And when she was new, she was considered a lot more powerful on the field. People wanted to get her off the field a lot sooner. I've heard people say Boudica squishy, and then obviously YSG, especially in the early game, right? Like this is more like a KVK1 thing. If you see a YSG on the field, that's like the #1 target, right? So that's something we're just looking at the kit, or maybe looking at the reports or the A/B testing. You're not going to get that, but that feedback is very important. The other one, it's also very subjective, is if a march is too slow, right? So Guan Leonidas, actually before my time, right? There's some people that love it. Some people it's just too slow for them. And the march could be good. It could trade well, but if you're using it, it always feels too slow for you. Then it might not actually be a really good march for you, right? Another one would be ZLYSG. There's no march speed there, right? It's going to do really well if you can actually manage a position well and not get out of position. But for most people, it's just way too slow. It's not usable. And then I think actually on the screen, I had a third one that was too slow. I forgot to add it. It's I've heard some people say they don't like William Wallace and Luce because they just feel like that march is very slow compared to Luce Alex. Right now, I personally have never used a William Wallace march, so I don't know. But those are just some examples of when you hear anecdotal feedback on like the field test. That's the way to go about it. Right now, what's most important, and it's kind of like I guess it doesn't matter too much because like the most real field test is when you use a commander. But if you're using the commander, unless you're using it on someone else's account, that means you already actually invested in the commander, and by then it's kind of too late anyways, right? But regardless, the field test is kind of important. A little less important to me than the A/B testing and then the open field reports, but that's just like another way to kind of gauge a commander. Right now, the results that I suggest anyone that's watching this, you just throw out is the results of duels, okay? Duels are not reflective of what open fielding is like. I did mention that occasionally on the field, you might have one march against another, you're dueling, but those are like few and far between. And then even when it happens, that reflects a very, very, very small percentage of the time that you're actually open fielding. All right, so here I'm just going to give you some examples of commanders that are good at duels, actually bad at the open field, right? So Sargon is one, and the reason why Sargon is good at duels is because when you're dueling, you stay connected to the target, whereas like Sargon's active skill, it literally needs to be connected over 5 seconds for it to hit all 5 times, right? So not very realistic. Chuck or CJ, I have his I think his 3rd or 4th skill over here on the right. You can see his 4th skill. Essentially, every 4 seconds you're connected to a target, you get an extra stack where you have a probability of doing more increased skill damage every time, right? And it can actually stack up to 8 times. So that sounds good in theory, but like if you open field, then you're not always going to be staying connected with a target. A lot of times it's back and forth moving around. So CJ is one of those where if you use him in a duel, he's going to do really good. If you use him in Canyon, he might do really good, but in the open field, not so much, right? So, and then finally, one of the best dueling marches still around now is going to be Huaneski, right? Two high single target damage commanders, and they both greatly elevate skill damage. But when it actually comes to open field, one, you'll rarely ever see a Huanevsky on the field. And even if you do, because of the lack of AoE, like they might even like trade like pretty well, but it's just not a March that people are going to use on the field because it actually does way better in duels than open fielding, right? And then here's some examples of Marches that are actually bad at duels, but then good in the open field, right? So Nevsky Joan, in my opinion, is still the best March in the game, best Cav March in the game, right? Lucha Alex does not duel well. Lucha Alex, actually, in my opinion, is the best March overall in the game, still right now, right? Some people might disagree with that, but like I mean, I could make a strong case from the open fielding reports. It does better than William Wallace Lucha. It does better trade-wise than Scipio Lucha. And then if you look at Alex's debuff, it's probably one of the best debuffs in the game, right? So when you have all of those things that you add together, to me, like I can make a strong argument that Lucha Alex is still the best March in the game. And then finally, Guan Skip, a little bit aged now, but if you go back like a year ago, when Guan Skip was one of the best Marches in the game, right? Like it's either Nev Joan or Guan Skip a year and a half ago. And it's notoriously not good at dueling, right? It's just not. So if you actually use the commander as part of a pair in a duel and it doesn't do well, and then you use that to determine whether a commander is good or not, you're going to be off. It doesn't mean there's no correlation. There are going to be really good dueling Marches that are actually also just really good in the open field. But I would actually, at the very least, take any dueling results with a giant grain of salt, or just throw it out completely, and then put a lot more value in the reports in the open field, and then even the results of A/B testing. All right. If you watched all the way to the end yet, you haven't, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.